Hello and welcome to the Synthetic History channel, where we talk about events that didn't happen as if they did. Today I will talk about what can happen with the world in Hoi 4 with the mod Road to 56 if suddenly all, or at least most countries, decide to change their ideology to fascism, and the countries with the already existing fascist regime, or those who in reality became fascist, if possible changed it to an alternative path. Also, let's put a civil war counter from the previous video. There will be a lot of them here. And let's see what will happen to the world without parliaments, elections, free market and other nonsense. Fascist world in Hoi 4. 1936. At the time there were in fact only 4 fascist states in the world: Italy, Austria, Germany and Japan with its satellites. Fascist or near-fascist movements were present in virtually every country, but had little influence. Nevertheless, things were about to change. As has happened more than once before, dramatic political changes in Europe began in France. Under the influence of the existing political instability and the decline in national spirit after World War I, right-wing movements began to gain strength. The situation in the country resembled that of Germany in 1932-33 and Italy in 1921-22. 2 months later, after unsuccessful parliamentary elections for the right wing, in which the Popular Front coalition won, the underground right-wing radical group La Cagoule, meaning the Hood, organized a partially successful armed coup. They were supported by the anti-parliamentary military, in particular General Louis Franchet d'Espèrey, famous for his successes in World War I. The remnants of the Republicans fled to the north and south of the country. Thus began the French Civil War. The advantage was clearly on the side of La Cagoule. This event gave the impetus for similar actions from the fascists of other countries and generally started the so-called Dusk of Democracies, a series of pro-fascist coups and civil wars around the world. In June in Britain, the Black Shirts, led by Oswald Mosley, began an organized campaign of marches across the country. On July 1st, the French Civil War ended with the victory of the fascists. In the same months, the civil wars between fascists and democrats began, first in Spain and then in Romania. Interestingly, in Spain the fascists fought to restore the monarchy, while in Romania they fought to eliminate it. In August, the Summer Olympics took place in Berlin. At this time of upheaval, Germany, which had already experienced what was happening in the rest of the world, remained one of the most stable countries. In September, civil war broke out in Estonia, and its neighbor Finland greatly increased its territories thanks to Karelia, which it received from the USSR. Quite a strange decision by Stalin, who met Finland's demands. But never mind. In Honduras, the American United Fruit Company, with the support of the corrupt local military, organized a coup in the country. Basically, the whole country began to exist for the sake of banana exports. This is what I call a corporate state under the control of a corporation. At the same time in Venezuela, also the military, dissatisfied with the result of the elections, organized a successful coup. In October, Hitler invades the Rhineland. It's about time, I think. In Estonia, the nationalists prevailed. November. Brazilians jumped from the frying pan straight into the fire. In yet another military coup, the authoritarian Getúlio Vargas regime was overthrown and the green-shirt integralists came to power. In the US, Republican Alfred Landon won the election. He promised to bring back the gold standard, which would further lead to significant consequences. 1937. Italy was still unable to conquer Ethiopia. Haile Selassie was able to organize a good defense in the mountains, which forced the Italians to suspend their attacks. The fascists in Romania, who had won the civil war, immediately entered into an alliance with Germany. The latter was the first to recognize the Codreanu government. April. Italy occupies Albania. June. In the Spanish Civil War, which was still going on, two new forces arose. The pro-monarchist Carlists separated from the Falangist nationalists, and the anarchists revolted in the Republican part of the country. At the same time in Peru, the monarchists somehow managed to dig up an heir to the Inca Empire, and began the civil war, doomed to be long because of the conditions of the Andes Mountains. Sweden ceded Lapland to Finland. A surprising event, considering that it had renewed its claim to the Åland Islands the previous year. July. Japan invades China. Because of the Chiang Kai-shek's support of the New Life movement and the increasing influence of the blue shirts fascists, most of the warlords and Maoist communists have not supported the central government in the war. 3 months later, the defenses would be breached. The Japanese entered Beijing. August. Hungary, under threat of German invasion, united with Austria, by then effectively a German puppet. September. After the Black Shirts March on Downing Street, the British authorities were forced to hold a referendum, in which the fascists were victorious. The British Parliament was abolished, and Mosley became the de facto ruler of the country. Remarkably, all the dominions have so far remained loyal to the crown, and in Australia, the local fascist Centre Party has seized power. In the Netherlands, against this backdrop, Germany seized British trade influence. October. Britain and Italy formed an alliance. Ethiopia became completely surrounded by enemies, leaving it no chance of survival. However, it took the Ethiopians a year to realize this. November. Finland demanded Norway's northern territories, and having been refused, declared war on the latter. 1938. The Brown Plague continued to march on the world. In the Mexican referendum, the National Revolutionary Party prevailed. Not everyone in the country liked this news, especially the Catholic Church, which the fascists wanted to eliminate. So 2 months later, in March, they revolted. February. The victory of the Falangists in Spain. March. The United Fruit Company decided to expand its assets by declaring war on Nicaragua, and in Poland, disgruntled Democrats and peasants started a civil war. April. Dominions of the British Empire began to declare their independence one after another. Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, India. Brazil declares war on Uruguay and joined the Axis. Following it, China also joined the alliance. Hitler was betting on it in the Eastern War. The German navy, army and equipment were sailing to China. Then Estonia joined this alliance, and in May Finland. Norway was still struggling by then, but fell to German attacks 2 months later. In Poland, the peasant uprising was suppressed. June. Civil war in the USSR. The Whites began a rematch. August. Uruguay surrendered. Bulgaria joined the Axis. September. The Banana Corporation took over Nicaragua. Dissatisfied with government policies and the strengthening of right-wing silver shirt organizations, some US states, led by former President Roosevelt, attempted secession by creating the Constitutional States of America, which led the country to the Second Civil War. I have, by the way, a previous video just about that, only in a slightly different timeline. General MacArthur seized power in Washington, promising to restore order to the country. After Czechoslovakia's refusal to cede the Sudetenland to Germany, the former joined the alliance of Britain and Italy, which by that time had already formed into the anti-Hitler alliance. It was followed by France, which had made Belgium its satellite. Fearful of such a powerful coalition, Hitler abandoned the idea of invasion. October. Estonia made an attempt to take over the Baltic countries. Latvia surrendered without a fight, while Lithuania decided to struggle. After 4 days, Finland and Estonia united into one country. November. MacArthur signs the War Powers Act, giving him de facto dictatorial powers. Fascist Iran attacked Afghanistan. December. With the British invasion of Ireland, the League of Nations, having shown its failure, disbanded itself. The world was completely transformed into a wild jungle, where the strong ate the weak. Argentina invaded Paraguay. The USSR and Germany signed a non-aggression pact. For Stalin, who was suffering defeats at the hands of the Whites, this treaty allowed not to fear a stab in the back. However, the value of such a treaty was tending to zero, given the geopolitical situation in the world. But whatever. 1939. The number of democracies in the world could be counted on the fingers of two hands. The Muslims of India began a war of independence. Ireland was fully occupied. February. Catholics lost the civil war in Mexico. Iran, not having finished its war with Afghanistan, declares war on Iraq. Lithuania, after 3 months of desperate resistance, surrendered. March. Another attempt to expand United Fruit's acreage, this time in Guatemala. Venezuela joined the Axis. The same month, together with Brazil, they attacked Colombia. June. Civil war in Portugal. Fascist versus the near-fascist Salazar. 2 weeks later, the war ended in his victory. July. Mexico joined the Axis. Bulgaria became a puppet of Romania. August. Scandinavia was completely under the control of the fascists. End of the India-Pakistan War by the recognition of the latter's independence. September. Colombia fully occupied. Argentina invaded Chile. Within a month, it surrendered. October. The Whites won the civil war in Russia. However, the war in general was not over for them. Using the instability of the civil war, some republics broke away from the USSR, including Ukraine, which Russia was not going to let go. November. Iran managed to conquer Iraq, despite the two-front war. The year ended with a curious event. In a referendum in Austria-Hungary, 146% voted for unification with Switzerland. There was nothing Hitler could do about the will of the people. 1940 began with the months-long Argentine-Bolivian War. After Poland rejected German demands for the transfer of Danzig, Hitler declared war on them. Poland entered into an alliance with Japan. Japan, by the way, in spite of German help, was moving quite well deep into China. Chiang Kai-shek was faced with the clear threat of Nanjing encircling. May. Russia fully occupied Ukraine. Constitutionalists faced defeat at the hands of MacArthur, formed a new American alliance extending from Canada to Argentina. Switzerland declared war on France. Iran joined the British alliance. And in exchange for oil extraction rights, Britain entered its protected war. Iran's example was followed by its adversary Afghanistan, which joined the Axis. Thus, on June 3rd, the war in Central Asia, oddly enough, gave rise to a large-scale war in Europe. The forces of the parties were roughly equal, and Germany, even with the support of the Greater Luxembourg, could not break through the defenses of Belgium, much less France, and to be honest, did not really try. Then Switzerland, which was already at war and was quite successful at it, joined the Axis. Czechoslovakia, which had beforehand withdrawn from the Allies, was now surrounded.
This is fine.
Spain joined the Axis, but not the war. August. Estonia-Finland attacked Russia, thus dragging the reborn empire into a new Great War. MacArthur, in response to Roosevelt's alliance, which began to push back his army, formed his own alliance with underdogs Guatemala and Peru, who were not taken in by the cool alliance. The civil war was dragging on. September. Chinese troops in Nanjing were encircled. The Japanese were finishing off a second grouping in the south. German troops had already returned to Europe by that time. October. Against the background of the losses to Romania on the Ukrainian front, the fascist Konstantin Rodzaevsky seized power in Russia. On the Western Front, things were not going well for the Axis. After previous Swiss successes, no new breakthrough was achieved. The situation was reminiscent of the trench warfare of World War I. With the fall of the last Chinese stronghold, Nanjing, and the subsequent massacre in the city, China was fully occupied. Well, almost fully. The government of Chiang Kai-shek fled to Kashgaria. After the Netherlands refused to enter the war, or at least give German troops passage, Hitler declared war on them. The Allies got a new member. 1941 was a year of several shifts in the balance of power. In March, Turkey set the stage for a new Balkan alliance. American fascists launched a counter-offensive. Egyptian troops landed in Athens. Spain's entry into the war. The fall of the British garrison of Gibraltar. And from this point on, a little more detail. As I said, the Western Front was pretty stable, and the invasion to the Netherlands did not improve the situation. On the contrary, the local plains provided an opportunity for an Allied offensive. Hitler needed to expand the war zone, so Spain was promised significant territories in Africa. And Spain's entry into the war did help. Their troops broke through the French defense, rather flimsy, but still. A pro-German government was established in Swiss-occupied Italy. Mussolini's Italy became a puppet of Britain. Does this count as a civil war? Perhaps. And the Axis armies would have advanced even further. But then several new countries got involved in the war against them, in one way or another. These were Turkey and Yugoslavia, which attacked Greece, and Czechoslovakia, whose new prime minister, Jan Sirovi, realizing that the situation was clearly not fine for the country's future, insisted that the republic should return to the Allies and enter the war. This moment was a turning point. Russia, which until recently had been gradually surrendering its lands, began a counteroffensive. Similar situations occurred in the West as well. For example, on July 24th, the Greater Luxembourg fell. And then it was obvious to everyone that the victory would be in the hands of the Allies. The only question was how long it would take them to win. A day later, Japan attacked the Philippines, subject of the Roosevelt's America. Already in September, the islands were under full Japanese control. In October, Bulgaria surrendered, followed by its master. In November, the Axis was augmented by fruity Honduras, which changed alliance and dragged the Axis into war with MacArthur. And because of Mexico's entry into the war, the American fascists began to retreat again. In December, Portugal and Saudi Arabia entered the war on opposite sides. The following year was the final year for the war in Europe. Madrid fell in February, Vienna in March. In April, Switzerland surrendered. Also in April, the Japanese, deciding that somehow they were doing too well, attacked British Malaya. Thus, they became at war with almost the whole world. In May, Arabia surrendered. In June, Denmark and the Dutch East Indies. In July, Spain. With the fall of Berlin on July 15th, the total defeat of the Axis was days away. The countries of South America, realizing the pointlessness of resistance, surrendered. The winners had treated the losers harshly. Most of the countries had been annexed. Only Brazil and Sweden kept at least some territories, and even remained independent. Oh, that's right, there was also Mexico, which became a satellite of Russia. Mussolini, who got nothing from the peace treaty, declared a victorious end to the civil war. But the war was still going on in Asia, where Japan, which had conquered most of China, was strong and was taking over more and more colonies. They intended to take over all of China. by declaring war on the remaining warlords and the Chinese communists. So there began a long war of attrition that lasted for many years. And although the Japanese were winning in some places, they were only delaying the inevitable. In America, with the Mexican withdrawal from the war, the balance shifted again in favor of MacArthur's troops, this time for good. A final victory, however, was still a long way off. 1943. The war was being fought on 3 continents. The Japanese had decided to fight in South America, for some reason. And everything was following the trends I had already outlined, with nothing new happening globally until November. Then a new civil war broke out in Italy. One was not enough for them. Now the pro-Japanese monarchists rebelled. They were joined by Poland, which until then had remained neutral after its liberation, and later by Turkey, Yugoslavia and Portugal, which had received virtually nothing as a result of the Berlin Treaty. However, even this was not enough to pose any threat to the Allies. Poland surrendered in December and Portugal the following January. In March, the British captured Istanbul and forced the Turks to capitulate. And with the fall of Belgrade at the hands of the Red Army, I mean the Tsarist army, the Balkan Entente faded into oblivion. The Allies again annexed the losers. In America, 1944 marked the end of the Civil War. The fascists occupied Cuba in February, Canada in June. In September, they achieved a complete victory, uniting the United States, and at the same time annexing most of the Roosevelt's alliance. After the Civil War ended, MacArthur resigned as president, and Charles Lindbergh, a compromise figure between the Silver Shirts and the military, became head of the country. In October, the Japanese returned the Philippines to them for fear of the possible war. And for good reason. A month later, the US declared war on independent New Zealand. However, they did not intend to invade it. Within 3 months of their inaction, New Zealand had rejoined the Allies. The US was dragged back into the ongoing World War. And, oddly enough, they began to lose. Well, not that strange, 6 years of civil war had taken its toll. But still, they were fighting on their continent. Even the Ho Chi Minh Rebellion in Vietnam didn't help. They only lasted 10 days. In September, New York and Los Angeles fell. Mussolini gave a speech in Italian-occupied Washington. In November, the US capitulated. Britain took most of the land, becoming practically sole ruler of both Americas. All hail Britannia, so to speak. Now all that was left was Japan and its satellites. Fierce fighting continued in Asia and South America for several years, until the British dropped a nuclear bomb in Hiroshima on June 7, 1948. And these horrible weapons did not frighten the Japanese. The war dragged on for another year. The Allies had to destroy the Japanese fleet first and then to land an invasion force. On March 5th, the Soviet and Russian troops occupied Tokyo. At the end of the month, Japan surrendered. But the war was still going on in Manchuria. On August 6, 1948, the war finally ended. The whole world was in the hands of the European countries, united in one alliance. However, I want to remind you that one of the characteristic traits of fascism is the constant search for an enemy and the fighting against them. And in the world of fascism, a global alliance simply could not exist in the long run. The world was waiting for new wars, new alliances, new revolutions, but this is material for another story, and I would like to end this story here. Jacob was with you, and with that, I say goodbye.